You feel it before you can name it. A heaviness behind the eyes. A throat that scrapes when you swallow. A body that suddenly wants nothing more than to lie down and disappear for 3 days. You know exactly what this is. You reach for a pill, a thermometer, maybe a doctor's number on your phone. The answer is immediate. The relief is engineered. But here's the part nobody tells you. For almost the entire span of human existence, there was no pill, no thermometer, no number to call, and yet your ancestors survived. Not just survived, thrived, built civilizations, crossed oceans, lived long enough to become you. So what did they actually do when they got sick? The answer is stranger, darker, and more brilliant than you would ever expect. First, you need to understand something about the human body that most people get completely backwards. Your body is not passive when you get sick. It does not simply break down and wait to be fixed. It launches a coordinated, aggressive campaign the moment a pathogen enters. Your temperature rises on purpose. Your appetite vanishes on purpose. You feel exhausted, heavy, and miserable entirely on purpose. Evolutionary biologist Paul Ewald spent decades studying what he calls the host defense hypothesis, and his conclusion was simple. Most of what you call sickness is actually your body fighting, not failing. The fever is the weapon. The fatigue forces you to stop moving so your immune system can redirect energy toward the battle. The loss of appetite starves the bacteria that need iron to reproduce. You are not a victim of your symptoms. You are a soldier being equipped by them. Your ancient ancestors understood this. Not in the language of science, but in the language of pattern, observation, and thousands of years of watching what happened when you ignored the body versus when you listened to it. The first thing ancient humans did when they got sick was almost certainly rest. This sounds obvious until you realize how radical it was. In a world where you do not rest, you starve. Stopping meant not hunting, not gathering, not contributing to the group that kept you alive. Choosing rest was not laziness, it was a gamble. And yet anthropological records show consistently that early human groups made accommodations for sick members. Researcher Amanda Mummert, studying skeletal remains from the transition between foraging and agricultural societies, found evidence that communal care existed long before formal medicine. The sick were fed by others. They were moved to shelter. The group absorbed the cost of individual illness because the group understood instinctively that disease spreads and that a recovered hunter is worth more than a dead one. This is the first ancient medicine. Community. The second thing ancient humans reached for was plants. Not randomly, not desperately, with a precision that took your breath away when modern scientists finally started examining it. Ethnobotanist Daniel Moerman spent years cataloging the medicinal plant knowledge of indigenous cultures around the world and found an astonishing pattern. Across groups with no contact with each other, separated by oceans and continents, humans had independently identified the same plants for the same ailments. Willow bark for pain and fever, garlic for infection, ginger for nausea, echinacea and its relatives for immune support. These were not guesses. They were the result of something that makes modern clinical trials look almost short-sighted. Thousands of years of continuous human experimentation, passed down through every generation, tested in real bodies under real conditions, revised and refined until only what worked survived. Willow bark contains salicylic acid. Your aspirin tablet is its direct chemical descendant. The ancient human reaching for the right plant was not primitive. They were the accumulated result of every sick ancestor who came before them, every failure filtered out, every success remembered. But plants were only part of the picture. The third thing ancient humans did when they got sick was something modern medicine is only now beginning to take seriously. They used heat, not just fire for warmth, deliberate, intentional exposure to controlled heat. Sweat lodges among indigenous North American peoples, steam baths in ancient Persia, saunas in early Scandinavian and Finnish culture, hot spring immersion across virtually every ancient civilization that had access to volcanic or geothermal water. For a long time, historians treated these as cultural rituals, spiritual practices, things you put in a different category from medicine. Then researchers started looking at the biology. Matthias Gromeyer, a cancer and virology researcher at Duke University, discovered that many viruses are heat sensitive. They replicate more slowly, or stop entirely, at temperatures slightly above normal body temperature. The body's own fever mechanism is exploiting this exact vulnerability in a sweat lodge. It does externally what a fever does internally. Your ancestors were not performing magic. They were applying heat therapy with a precision that makes sense the more deeply you look at the biology. They also used cold, moving between extremes. Hot spring, then cold plunge. Sweat lodge, then snow. The vascular whiplash of rapid temperature change dries blood circulation, flushes metabolic waste, and triggers hormonal responses that modern researchers are only beginning to map. Your ancestors sitting in a freezing river after a night in a sweat lodge looked irrational. They may have been ahead of their time. The fourth thing ancient humans did when sick was manipulate their gut. Before the word microbiome existed, before anyone knew what a bacterium was, cultures around the world were eating fermented foods during illness with a consistency that cannot be coincidental. Fermented milk products in East Africa and Central Asia. Fermented vegetables across Europe and Asia. Fermented grains in the Middle East. Kimchi, kefir, kvass, sauerkraut. All of these practices are thousands of years old, and all of them produce exactly what a damaged immune system needs: a flood of living microorganisms that compete with pathogens, reinforce the gut lining, and signal the immune system to calibrate rather than overreact. Microbiologist Justin Sonnenberg at Stanford has spent years showing that gut microbiome diversity is directly linked to immune function, mental state, and the severity of illness outcomes. Your ancient ancestor eating fermented mare's milk through a fever was not following a doctor's orders. They were following a tradition that encoded something real. The fifth thing ancient humans did when sick is harder to quantify, but it may be the most important. They told stories. They sang. They called the healer the elder, the spiritual figure, the person in the group who held the ritual knowledge of what happened when the body betrayed you. You might call this superstition. Neuroscience calls it something more interesting. Research led by Tor Wager at Dartmouth and later at the University of Colorado demonstrated that belief, expectation, and meaning-making have measurable effects on immune response and pain tolerance. The placebo response is not imaginary. It is a real physiological cascade triggered by the expectation of recovery. When an ancient shaman told you that the fever would break, that the plants would work, that the ritual meant you were being healed, they were not lying to you. They were activating a mechanism in your brain that genuinely accelerated the process. The ceremony was not decoration, it was dosage. You have to hold two things in your mind at once. Ancient medicine was often wrong. Bloodletting killed patients. Trepanation opened skulls for reasons that had nothing to do with brain pressure. Miasma theory blamed bad air for diseases caused by microbes. The errors were real, sometimes lethal. But the correct parts were also real. The plant knowledge was real. The rest was real. The communal care was real. The heat therapies were real. The fermented foods were real. The psychology of belief was real. Ancient humans worked with an incomplete map, but they were genuinely navigating. Here is what you never think about when you reach for your ibuprofen. The reason that tablet works is because someone once noticed that a certain tree's bark reduced fever, and told someone else. And that someone told someone else. Across 100,000 years of sick humans lying in firelight, testing leaves, watching each other, remembering what worked, forgetting what killed, passing it forward. Your medicine cabinet is the last chapter of a story that started when the first human placed the first cool wet leaf against a burning forehead and felt something shift. The pill is the newest sentence. The story is ancient. Tonight, if your throat starts to scrape when you swallow, and your eyes feel heavier than they should, and your body starts asking you to lie down and stop, listen to it. Your ancestors learned exactly this lesson. In the dark, with nothing but fire and pattern and each other. And somehow, impossibly, they passed it all the way down to you.